Hi, this is Chris with Nightfall Audiobooks, and I have for you today Shadow Climber by Mickey Zucker Reichert. This is Book 2 in the Bifrost Guardians series. I have to begin this with a note to the reader by Mickey Zucker Reichert. The note says, "The astute reader will realize that the world of the Shadow Climber corresponds to an area of ancient Germany across the sea from the old Scandinavia where Godslayer was set. The historical and geographical inaccuracies are purely intentional. They are explained painlessly in subsequent volumes. The sequel, Dragon Rank Master, continues the adventures of Al Larson, as well as those of some of the people from this novel." This is Mickey Zucker Reichert's way of saying, I know you just read the first book in this series, Godslayer, and it ended awesome. Al Larson and Galanar are on their way to go get Silm back from the depths of hell, but put all that on hold right now because we are introducing another set of characters, and we're going to blend their stories in the third book, Dragon Rank Master. You know, I'm glad that there's a disclaimer in the beginning of this novel, because I really don't like Shadow Climber. It's okay. It's very okay. What really makes it okay and not good or great is that what I just said, you end Godslayer with this awesome ending with Al Larson and Galanar on their way into hell to go rescue Silm's soul, and then they put that on hold for this story that has nothing to do with anything else in this universe until the third novel. And it sucks. The characters in Shadow Climber are okay. They're good. They're fine. It's okay. They do come into play in the third book in Dragon Rank Master. It's okay. I don't know why Mickey Zucker Reichert decided to make this decision, but I guess it was important for her to make it, so she did. I guess it was important to her world building, so she made this decision to fracture the story as soon as it starts, go into a different direction, and then bring it all back for books 3, 4, and 5. Bifrost Guardians is a 5-book set, and I have to say, Shadow Climber is my least favorite. Godslayer is great. The third book, Dragon Rank Master, is very good. I forget all about the fourth book, but the fifth book ties it all together very nicely, and it's wonderful, it's fantastic, and it's awesome, awesome fantasy. All in all, this is an excellent series. Even though I don't really care for Shadow Climber, this entire series is like a 9 out of 10. This is wonderful fantasy. If I didn't think you would enjoy it, I would not be reading it to you. Because of my issues with Shadow Climber, I will be doing something that I don't usually do. Normally, I will read to you one book from a series per year until it's done. So like the Babysitter series, you get one book a year around Halloween. The Cheerleader series, you get one of those books around fall, like August or so. And with Silent Night, you got one of those books around Christmas. Well, this year, we're doing something different. You will be getting Shadow Climber, Book 2 of the Bifrost Guardians, and Dragon Rank Master, Book 3 of the Bifrost Guardians. I'm only doing this because I think it's important to the story that you don't wait an entire year before picking out Dragon Rank Master. You should be listening to Books 1, 2, and 3 in pretty close succession. And then in the following years, you'll get Books 4 and 5, one at a time per year. It's unusual for me, but we're going to be doing this because I think this is the best course of action to take to give the listener the best experience. Now, while I do R.L. Stine novels pretty much all the time, and they're very easy to do, and I've gotten them down to almost a science at this point, doing other authors is more difficult because the typeface is smaller, the font's a lot smaller. The structure of the page is different. We're spending way more time on internalizing ideas and descriptions and narrating, and we're not just moving through the story very quickly. Chapters are between 20 and 45 minutes long before I get a chance to edit them. So, with all that said, it takes me about 1 month to read one novel from Mickey Zucker Reichert or Patricia C. Reed, because they're so different. I know that the page count's about the same. They're like 200, 220 pages or a little more than that. But the production is so much different that it takes me a lot longer to do. If I didn't think it was important that you listen to 2 of these books in 1 year, then I wouldn't be spending 2 months out of this year to create them for you. Just food for thought. And I hope I enjoy it too, because I haven't read this in about 20 years. So let's begin. What do I read next? I don't know. Please send me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I am also on YouTube @nightfallaudiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and please hit the join button to show your support. Any help is greatly appreciated. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me, narrate them a book and tell them a story. Thank you very much for listening, and let's begin. Welcome to a Nightfall Audiobooks production of The Bifrost Guardians, Book 2, Shadow Climber, by Zucker Reichert. Prologue. Sunlight slanted through the forest of oak and hickory, sheening from the smooth hide tents of Cullenberg's army. Perched on a rotting stump in the Danwald wilderness, Ilarion chewed the end of his stylus, watching the soldiers settle in for the evening. To his right, 5 guardsmen butchered a red deer for the evening meal. Ahead, a row of tents obscured Illarion's view. Through the spaces between, he watched the cavalrymen brushing the flank of one of the striped horses, which had become the Baron's trademark. Ilarion set his stylus to the paper, bored with chronicling the guardsmen's routine. But as the army information liaison, his job was to report even the most mundane affairs of the soldiers to Baron Dietrich and to review their performances down to the last critical detail. He scribbled, "Approaching sundown. Banurad, Erin, Theodobald, Berg, Waldefred. Prepare meal." A branch snapped. Ilarion glanced up at a solidly built soldier who addressed him briskly. "Captain Tazir wants you in his tent, sir." Without further clarification, he turned and marched away. Ilarion clapped his ledger closed. Discomforted by the summons, he fidgeted. Why would the High Commander wish to meet with a political officer now? He clambered to his feet and wound through the maze of tents. We've already discussed our next offensive. In the 10 years of war against Danwald's barbarians, he's never deigned to discuss details with me, nor to simply chat. Ilarion scowled, aware of information about himself he would rather Captain Tazir Madakin did not know. Ilarion threaded between the last sequence of camps and stopped before the commander's tent. He took a deep breath and loosed it slowly, not wishing to look suspiciously distressed by the captain's calling. Still tense despite the maneuver, he raised the flap and stepped within. An oil lamp bathed the interior of Captain Tazir Madakin's tent. Its flames swayed in the breeze of Ilarion's movement. Light flickered over the simple wooden furnishings. The captain occupied a chair before a cluttered desk. His tanned muscles bunched beneath the thin linen of his uniform. The well-kept brass of his buckles glittered. Black hair shadowed eyes, gray and hard as stone. "Don't bother to sit, Ilarion." Tazir's voice was a graveled bass. "This won't take long." Ilarion swallowed. Despite a decade in the Baron's service, he still felt unsettled by the captain's icy glare. I don't understand." The captain's eyes narrowed. He clamped a hand over the disarray before him, and the stylus disappeared beneath his massive fist. "I have evidence you've been dealing black market drugs to my men." Though true, the accusation jarred Ilarion. As the youngest son of a nobleman, he had received only a piddling inheritance at his father's death. Unwilling to toil like a commoner and embittered by the station fate accorded him, he had considered murdering his elder brothers. But aside from its illegality, the latter course posed practical difficulties. 2 of his brothers were warriors, and the last had been apprenticed by a blacksmith, swinging the hammer until his muscles bulged. Without recourse, Ilarion had used cunning in his father's status to attain his political position. Careful dealings with the Baron of Collensburg and the money from his black market sales had already drawn him nearer to promotion. Now, Captain Tazir Madakin threatens to destroy 10 years of manipulation with a single accusation. Ilarion gathered breath for denial, but the captain waved a hand in scornful dismissal. "Save your words, Ilarion. I'd sooner trust a street beggar." Ilarion scowled, infuriated by the insult. Captain Tazir rose, his demeanor threatening yet composed. "I'm telling you now to give you an opportunity to stop without bringing you up on charges. What my men do in their free time is their own business, but I won't tolerate anyone undermining their abilities as warriors or endangering their own and their companions' lives." Tazir retook his seat, his expression bleakly forbidding. His voice went soft. "Dismissed, Ilarion." Ilarion drew a ragged breath. Without the income from his drug sales to the soldiers, he knew he could never buy his promotion. His tone went shrill with feigned offense. "I'm innocent. The captain's fist slammed to the tabletop, scattering papers like fluttering ghosts in the lamplight. "Dismissed, Illyrian. Get out of my tent before I change my mind and try you today." Anger spun ideas through Illyrian's mind. He whirled and stormed through the tent flap. Immediately outside, he collided with a soldier. With a muttered curse, he pushed past. The warrior shoved Illyrian back with an open violence. The nobleman staggered. He snapped his head about to confront the other man. It was Ardmore, one of the Baron's fiercest bowmen and his most successful scout. Ardmore grinned. "Sorry, Illyrian," he said with mocking insincerity. Without awaiting a reply, he entered the captain's tent. Rage burst like flame across Illyrian's mind. Hatred flared against the indiscretions of a peasant soldier and the captain who could destroy his reputation with a single report. "He'll ruin me." The nobleman no longer harbored any doubts. Captain Tizir must die. Illyrian tromped to the edge of the camp and sat, cross-legged, on a bed of pine needles. For a silent hour, he stared at the captain's tent, alternately cursing Tizir and vowing bitter vengeance. At sunset, he watched Ardmore and Tizir leave for dinner. Illyrian remained, his appetite lost, his fury dulled to cold calculation. His vigil continued as the captain returned to his tent alone, and later, wandered into the forest to relieve himself. Then Illyrian's lips framed a smile, and cruel excitement suffused him. He flicked open his ledger and wrote, "Well after nightfall, Captain Tizir disappeared into the woods for an indeterminate period of time." Nearly 200 of Cullenberg's citizens gathered before the platform at the city gates, drawn there by the towering threat of the gallows. Despite the huddled, sweating mass of people, a shiver traversed young Tizir. He backstepped, glad for the reassuring warmth of his mother against him. She clapped a palm to his shoulder in reassurance, but her hand trembled and her fingers gouged his flesh. Though 12 years old, Tizir stood only as high as his mother's breasts. He knew he would never attain the resplendent proportions of the father after whom he was named, nor even those of a normal man. Craning his neck, he surveyed the crowd. Most wore the homespun shirts and breeches of Cullenberg's presentry, but the number of nobles seemed disproportionately high. Guards and soldiers, in uniforms of red and black, stood in tense clusters among the citizenry. Tizir recalled the many times the same people had watched in awe as the Baron bestowed honors and medals of heroism upon Captain Tizir, young Tizir's father. But this time, Tizir knew they had come to see his father die. Helpless tears welled in Tizir's eyes. This can only be a nightmare. He imagined himself in bed, attempting to find a different reality to disperse the cold terror of what he hoped was only a dream. But the crowd remained vividly clear. Their whispered conversations left him no choice but to believe. He rubbed tears away with hands toughened from tree climbing. Suddenly, he wished the calluses which scratched his eyelids had been won from practicing the sword maneuvers his father had taught him, rather than from boyish antics. A stately-looking man dressed in finely woven linen trimmed with red silk stepped to the platform. The crowd fell silent. Again tears blurred Tizir's vision, and his father's last words to his son rose in accusation. "A warrior dies twice, once for himself and once for his loved ones. You must remember, I have already died. Someday, I will not return from a battle. Your mother will cry, but you must remain dry-eyed. You are my son, and you must understand. My soul is long gone. My body will have only left to join it and leave me at peace." Tizir's hopelessness fled before a rush of righteous anger. The man on the platform raised his arm. He addressed the crowd, his voice a dramatic baritone. "Listen all, listen well. We have gathered in the sight of sacred Agarin to witness the execution of Tizir, supreme commander of Cullenberg's marshaled armies, found guilty of high treason against our most holy Baron, Lord Dietrich." Nervous whispers ran through the massed group. Tizir's small hands balled into fists. Behind him, his mother shivered, her breaths emerging in short sobs. Neighbors' hissed innuendos during the course of the trial had wounded her deeply, and she had wasted to a frail skeleton. Tizir winced and clung to her, numbly aware he might lose both parents in one day. The nobleman continued, "Lest anyone doubt this most harsh application of punishment, it must be remembered that Captain Tizir has committed the most heinous of crimes, and the one act unforgivable to soldiers, the sin of cowardice." Tizir shook his head, certain of his father's innocence, yet helpless to intervene. He watched in pained silence as the speaker produced a bound ledger. According to the notes of our Army Information Liaison, Captain Tazir Madakin's actions have seemed suspicious for some time. We find multiple entries documenting his late-night disappearances. He flipped through the pages. On the 16th day of the month of high suns, barbarian gold was discovered in the captain's tent, an odd finding for one violently opposed to attacking villages or plundering, even to add to the baron's treasury. Captain Tazir Madakin denied knowledge of the incident. The speaker turned more leaves. On the 21st day of that month, Captain Tazir Madakin hid his men at a woodland camp rather than participate in a flanking maneuver he had arranged. As a result, the frontal troop was decimated. The captain claimed the messenger informed him the frontal forces had been delayed. Citizens, the messenger denies leaving the frontal troop, and 2 of our brave soldiers and our liaisons swear he was at the front at the time the so-called message was delivered. Tazir Madakin's apparent concern for his own welfare cost the lives of over 100 of his loyal men. Their only crime was to follow orders he himself chose not to obey. His treason caused the death of your husbands, fathers, and sons. If anything, this punishment is too lenient. Full retribution must be gleaned from Agaran's hand in the afterlife, beyond the boundaries of our world. Shouts of indecipherable condemnation rose from the crowd. The speaker cleared his throat, then finished in an over-rehearsed monotone. As a duly appointed priest and executioner for the city-state of Cullensburg, I sentence Captain Tazir Madakin to death by hanging on this 5th day of the harvest moon in the 17th year of his high lord's reign. Hangman, proceed. Tazir's mother moaned. Her fragile frame went rigid. Tears drenched Tazir's collar. Stung by his mother's grief, he huddled closer, silently beseeching the expectant figures of Cullensburg citizenry. He located 6 guards clustered behind his mother. Pluchar, a young warrior who had often shared drinks with Tazir's father. Salik, the man who'd commanded the troop decimated by Captain Tazir's presumed treason, and, as the second in command, the one most likely to benefit from the captain's death. Young Tazir did not recognize the other men. Damn you! You know he's innocent! He imagined the soldiers drawing swords and rushing the platform in defense of their commander, but the men remained silent and attentive, guiltily avoiding Tazir's gaze. Tazir's father mounted the platform, led and flanked by spearmen. The captain wore a simple cloth tunic and breeks, stripped of the proud blacks and reds of his uniform and his bridge of rank. His hands were bound behind him, yet otherwise he looked no different than when he left home for the last of his many battles against Danwald barbarians. His black hair lay neatly combed. He carried his immense, swarthy form with a quiet dignity. His head remained high, and his eyes swept the crowd with friendly interest. Though not unexpected, Captain Tazir's courage unsettled his son. Hangman and executioner adjusted the ropes and pulleys, but Tazir could not tear his gaze from his father. Casually, the captain's gray eyes scanned the crowd, singling out and focusing upon each soldier in turn. Tazir noticed that not one of the men dared to meet his father's pointed stare. Then the captain looked directly at his only child. Tazir caught at his mother's skirt. Though distant, his father's eyes seemed clear, gray, and soft as clouds. Yet urgency lurked in their depths, a driving force which goaded Tazir to action. His gut drew into a tight knot. His eyes locked on his father's, attempting to read the older man's last request, yet still too young to understand the demand for vengeance. Captain Tazir Madakin spoke, his voice devoid of bitterness. Tazir. The crowd went silent, surprised the accused would waste his last breath by speaking his own name. My son, the captain finished softly, I was betrayed. Tazir turned his gaze towards Salik, but the new young captain stood with his head bowed. The tears on the soldier's cheeks looked unmistakably sincere. The hangman flicked a loop of rope over the head of the former supreme commander of Cullensburg's army. The elder Madakin remained still, accepting. He neither flinched nor shied, even as the hangman drew the slip knot tight to the base of his neck and signaled the pulleyman below. Shock numbed Tazir's mind. No longer able to believe in dreams, he surrendered to a fear which crushed his chest until he felt unable to breathe. The pulleyman yanked the rope hand over hand. The sisal went taut. The force lifted Captain Tazir Madakin from the ground. His wife's pained scream was lost beneath the cries of the crowd. She suddenly went limp and dropped to the ground. Mama! Tizir whirled to comfort her. Tears burned his eyes like poison, but immediately his father's plea returned. Your mother will cry, but you must remain dry-eyed. Ruthlessly, Tizir crushed his urge to weep. He glanced toward his father. The captain's skin had gone deathly pale. His gray eyes bulged. Then, the man who had so many times anticipated death in combat, and had faced his execution fearlessly, bucked and jerked reflexively to retain his last moments of life. Sorrow slapped Tizir with the force of a sea gale. His vision washed to a painful white. He wanted to run until the world collapsed about him, climb to the new star which, by Mordarn's religion, would hold his father's soul, and he needed to be alone. The crowd shifted to aid Tizir's mother, many of the same people whose whispered slurs had so weakened her. A hand clapped Tizir's shoulder, and a gruff male voice sounded in his ear. Taz? With an oath befitting a mercenary, Tizir broke free and ran. He crashed into a peasant. Impact sprawled him in the dust. Pain shot through his nose, but it seemed inconsequential compared with the emotional agony of watching his father die. Again he pushed into the masses, flailing his arms. Gradually a path cleared before him. A reedy voice cursed him, and others echoed blasphemies as he thrashed blindly through the crowd. Once free, he darted into the city streets. Tizir ran without direction. Though slight, he was strong and lithe. The sun had disappeared beneath the horizon before he paused to catch his breath, deep in an unfamiliar sector of the city. Leaning against the mud-chinked logs of a dwelling, he heard voices and footsteps in the roadway, but discomfort and disinterest rendered their words unintelligible. Soon the speakers rounded the corner of the building, dressed in the uniforms of Cullensburg's guardsmen. A lump formed in Tizir's throat. He felt the warm sting of beginning tears and bit his cheeks to keep from crying. Unable to control his grief and fearing to violate his last vow to his father, Tizir again raced into the street. He dodged through the roadways, their darkness broken only by the faint shimmer of moonlight. Tizir's headlong flight brought him through a narrow alley. He charged between the building's hulking shadows, blind to the rusted cooking pot and the 10 figures lounging around it. Suddenly, spent coals crunched beneath Tizir's sandals. His shin cracked painfully against iron. The pot rolled, splashing hot soup across his thighs. Impact bounced him to the ground. He rolled from instinct, abruptly aware of angry shouts around him. Tizir struggled to his feet. Before him stood nearly a dozen people, their hair long and frazzled, their expressions hostile. "Clumsy bastard!" one screamed. "Get him!" Tizir spun and raced down the alleyway. His legs ached from his already overlong run and his collision with the cooking pot. Fear and exertion soaked him with sweat. The pursuing footfalls closed rapidly. Though running for his life, Tizir gained a strange pleasure from the rush of excitement his terror inspired. For the first time, he could momentarily forget his father's death. Suddenly, a storefront loomed before Tizir. Its wooden awning protected a porchload of firewood. Cornered, Tizir whirled. His pursuers fanned into a half-circle before him. Panting, Tizir studied them in the moonlight. Closer, he recognized them as youngsters, some no older than himself. At least one was female. All of them wore tattered clothing, much of it far too large. The oldest and tallest of the street rogues sneered. "We've got him now." Another's voice grated with threat. "Let's kill him." The girl tossed her blonde tangle of hair. "He ruined our dinner." "What you mean?" A muscled teenager with a scarred face glowered at Tizir. "He is dinner. I'll skin him." Tizir bit his lip, heart pounding. He backstepped into the shadow of the awning. A child who appeared no older than 7 piped up breathlessly from the back. "You gonna kill him first, Blade, or just skin him?" Frantically, Tizir cast about him. His gaze missed nothing. The 10 rogues who baited him, blocking escape through the alleyway, the painted brown door of the store, its padlock clearly evident, the awning which towered 2 arms' lengths over his head. Fear heightened his senses. His mind channeled solely on the menace before him, allowing him to forget the trial which had occupied his thoughts and nightmares for weeks, and the mother he had left lying in a crowd of Cullensburg citizens. Blade crouched. "I think I'll just skin him." A knife appeared in his fist. Moonlight glittered off the blade, carving its edge into sharp focus. He closed on Tizir, his steps graceful and precise as a cat. The others followed, brandishing sticks, expectant and ready. Tizir glanced from Blade to the awning to the approaching gang. Breath rattled in his chest. His fists tensed and loosened. With a howl of purpose, he leaped. His fingertips hooked on the edge of the awning. He hung there for a moment, anticipating the cold sting of the knife. Leaf mold slicked his hands, and his grip faltered. He hissed in frustration. Tazir shivered, remembering the gnarled oak at the city limits. Elbows bent, he swung his body up and over the awning. More accustomed to branches, he misjudged the force of the maneuver and crashed to the top of the awning. Wood slivered through his breeches and into his knees. Shouts rose from the crowd below him. Tazir darted across the awning, his footfalls thundering on the thin layer of pine. He came to the far end and stopped abruptly. He whirled. A sandy-haired teen was hoisting his wiry body to the awning with a boost from his friends. Tazir looked down. A jump would land him back in the alley, surrounded by street toughs. Cursing, he glanced upward. Stars littered the sky. The moonlight revealed each mud and sod-choked log which supported the store. At the corner, the edges of wood overlapped, forming hand and toe holds Tazir could have climbed even when he was 6. Without hesitation, he scrambled to the roof. Tazir spun, seeking an escape from street rogues hungry enough to follow him to a rooftop and eat him. The stores on either side of the alley stood taller than the one he had climbed. The rift between the buildings gaped wide enough so Tazir dared not trust himself to jump without plummeting to his death. His palms went slick with sweat. Fear blurred the neighboring buildings to gray shapes. He inched forward and peered over the side. 2 of the ragged youths had gained the awning. The sandy-haired climber was nowhere he could see until a grubby fist appeared over the rooftop. Tazir leaped forward and stomped on the groping fingers. Their owner yelped and withdrew his hand with a string of ripe oaths. "Spread out! Up the other corners!" The street youth scattered. Tazir crouched, uncertain. Soon he heard the scrape of climbers from other parts of the building. He scuttled to an edge as the climbers' heads appeared over every side. They clambered to the rooftop and closed in on him. 4 boys and 1 girl. None appeared friendly. The sandy-haired youth nursed his hand, glaring. Tazir shivered closer to the edge. "Come any closer, and I swear I'll jump. I'd rather splash my blood all over the street than be eaten." With effort, he feigned a grimace of cold purpose. The eldest, who seemed to be the leader, stopped, staring with unconcealed incredulity. "Are you stupid or crazy?" The street toughs went still. The leader continued. "Hey, be calm. We's only teasing. You ruined our dinner. We thought you owed us some fun. We're not going to eat you." His 4 followers broke into uproarious laughter. Tazir hesitated. He studied the faces before him. The leader towered over him, the size of a grown man. A few years older than Tazir, the sandy-haired youth was long and lanky, built for running and climbing. Beside him, a youngster with mahogany-colored hair and eyes shifted from foot to foot. Though close to Tazir's age, he stood far taller and nearly double Tazir's weight. The girl watched intently but said nothing. The last of the group was a child who had goaded Blade. Now more embarrassed and frightened, Tazir tried to regain his lost dignity. "Yeah, well, I wasn't afraid." The street rogues chuckled. The girl's blue eyes sparkled. "Then why'd you run?" Tazir defended his honor, naturally adopting the poor grammatical speech of his pursuers. "There was 10 of you." He screwed his face into a mass of wrinkles, hoping he looked tough. "Now that you're only 5, I'll take all of you." Again the gang howled with laughter. Tazir felt relieved that Blade was still on the ground. The children on the roof seemed like petty thieves, but he harbored no doubt the knife-wielding ruffian would have killed him. The reddish-haired boy gestured at Tazir. "Easy on him now, he's just a child. He ain't no bigger than Mouse." He gestured at the 7-year-old who matched Tazir perfectly for height and breadth. Humiliation exploded to anger. Suddenly goaded beyond thoughts of consequence, Tazir screamed, "I'm not a child. I'm almost 13. Blade's voice wafted clearly from the ground. "Quit playing and take his money. He's got to pay for what he spilled." The leader looked questioningly at Tazir, who shook his head. The older boy hollered over the edge. "He ain't got no money, Blade. Then kill him and come down." The girl winced in sympathy. The leader rolled his eyes. "Easy, Blade. What's got your fire burning?" He addressed Tazir. "He done mean nothing." Anger tinged Blade's answer. "What you taking the baby's side, Warren? He ain't one of us." Tazir bit his lip, fighting the urge to counter Blade's insult. Warren shouted, "Well, maybe he should be one of us. He climbs better than Rabbit, and he's small. He'd fit about anywhere." Tazir said nothing, not at all sure he'd wanted to become a street rogue, but quite certain he wanted to prove himself as hardened as the youth who confronted him. "We already got Mouse," Blade argued. "It's longer. This boy says he's 13. Blade snorted. "And you believes him?" Warren shrugged. "Why not?" Rabbit leaned over the edge, his tone gruff with the impatient rudeness only a brother could voice with impunity. "Listen, maggot head, you're so damned worried about your dinner. You know the baker leaves his third-story window open. You know I can't climb up to his shop." For some time, no reply followed. An unfamiliar voice floated to the rooftop. "He does owe us dinner." Warren nudged Tazir. "So how about it? Can you climb to the third floor of a bakery?" Tazir smiled, glad of the distraction. "No problem," he lied. Tazir's walk home along the cobblestone roadways reawakened the mental anguish the excitement of stealing rolls had displaced. Concern for his mother quickened his pace, but it was nearly midnight before he reached the aging, sod-roofed structure of moss-chinked oak, which served as his family's cottage. He paused only long enough to realize the door had been left unlatched, then entered and pulled the panel shut behind him. The reek of alcohol pinched his nostrils. Discomfort gnawed at his chest. He had never seen his mother drink, and his father had confined his occasional consumption to the local tavern. But his mother lay on her raised straw pallet. She had drawn the handmade table to her bedside, and it held a ceramic jug, a small vial, and a knife. The candles in the wall sconce sputtered in the breeze from the closing door. Purple wine stained the blankets pulled up across her chest. Tazir cried out in terror. "Mama!" He ran to her side. "What's the matter?" Self-loathing filled him. May the gods forgive me. How could I leave her alone when I knew she would never survive without father? His mother spoke, her voice weak but soothing. "Nothing's wrong, Taz. It's all right." Tazir caught his mother's arm, his every breath painful. "What do you mean it's all right?" The strong-willed woman who had inspired Captain Tazir Madakin's heroics had withered, body and soul, to a form unrecognizable to her own son. "I want you to do something for me." Wine slurred her words, but her voice held an urgency Tazir dared not ignore. "Go live with your uncle on his farm near Vesburg." "No!" Tazir crouched before his mother, dizzy with fatigue and the acrid fumes of the wine. "I want to stay with you. Father told me to take care of you." Grief choked off his words. "I know I'm just small." Resentment twinged through him. "But I'll find a way to protect both of us, even if I never get big enough to use a sword." Tazir's mother stroked his knee. She stared at the ceiling. "You don't need to take care of me, Taz. I'm going to be with your father." She smiled strangely. Blankly, Tazir watched her. Her expression frightened him. "But father's dead." Tazir's mother continued as if he had not interrupted. "Yes, your father told you to be brave. There's one last thing you must perform for me, something I'm too weak to do myself. Your father would call me a coward. That's all right, but he wouldn't want his son to be a coward too." She paused, as if struggling with a decision, then continued with more resolve. "Promise me, Taz. Promise you'll do what I ask." Tazir gripped his mother's arm with both hands. The burden of his last vow to his father, not to cry, still ached within him. "Anything, Mama," he said hoarsely. She turned tear-glazed eyes to him, dark and soulless as the dead. Agaran's priest had slain not only her husband's person, but his character as well. Tazir could not know the torment in his mother's heart, nor the depth of her concern for her only child, but she knew that as long as he remained with her in Collinsburg, he would be only the traitor's son. On his uncle's farm, he would become just another pair of hands. He could learn to take care of himself, a lesson she could never hope to teach him. Tazir's mother reached a hand to his head and tousled his black hair fondly. She turned her other arm, palm upward, to reveal a string of dark salve, which ran from the inner point of her elbow to her wrist. She seized a knife on the bedside table and held it as she spoke. "I'm going to lie here. I want you to cut along this line as deeply as you can." She indicated her arm. Turning the knife, she offered its hilt to Tazir. Tazir cringed to the stone floor. Its cold dampness seemed to fold around him. "I can't do that." Fear ground through him. "Mama, I could never hurt you." He recalled the many times his mother had comforted him when he felt frightened, nursed him when he was ill, and encouraged him against all doubts. Her demeanor went hard, her eyes unforgiving. She prodded the hilt against his hand, still warm from her grip. "You must." He shied away. "You already promised, Tazir Madakin. Would you have your father look down from Mordane's star and see his son a coward and a liar?" Tazir closed his hand about the haft, seeking a means to free himself from a vow he dared not fulfill. "Father said to protect you," he whispered. "Don't make me do this." She turned her gaze back to the ceiling. "Get out," she hissed. Her rejection stung Tazir. I don't want to leave you." Tazir's mother's chin jutted beneath the nest of tangled hair. "The whole world is turned against me. Neighbors talk behind my back, and everyone calls your father a coward and a traitor. The only way you can protect me now is to do as I ask." Her mouth pursed with displeasure. "If you're willing to break a promise to your mother, I don't want you here." Tears welled into Tazir's blue eyes, and this time no vow in the world could stop them. His hand on the knife went slick with sweat. Gently, he laid his mother's pallid arm on the pallet for support. The blade fumbled from his grasp and dropped to the floor with a clink of metal. Glad for the delay, Tazir retrieved the knife and raised it. He felt hollow and empty. "You promised, Taz," his mother said. Tazir gritted his teeth until his jaw throbbed. Tears transformed his mother's arm to a blur. He imagined her flesh as a white plank, the dark line of salve a crack in the floorboards. The self-deception allowed him to plunge the blade through the crook of his mother's arm. The wetted steel bit easily through muscle and sinew, then jolted against bone. Tazir's stomach lurched. A sudden rush of grief forced him to avert his gaze. He ripped the knife downward, driven to finish the gruesome task as quickly as possible. His mother screamed and jerked away. Warm blood splashed Tazir's hand, and the movement wrenched the dagger from his grip. Tazir watched in horror as his mother struggled to rise, but she gathered only enough strength to roll from her pallet to the floor, blood splattering the stone like spilled wine. "Mama!" Tazir's pulse pounded in his ears. Fingers spread. He stared at the mother's blood which stained his hand like a living presence of evil. He dropped to his knees. A strangled sob emerged from his throat, and he vomited until his gut ached. Chapter 1. Tazir Madakin crouched beside the Madam Shylar on the second-story floor of Cullensburg's whorehouse, studying Illyrian through a hole in the floorboards. The nobleman's craggy face and tiny close-set eyes inspired an initial aversion. Illyrian paced, nodding his fingers. His gaze swept the room in a predatory manner. Tazir flicked unruly black hair from his eye. Who is he? Though average height for a woman, Shylar stood half a head taller than Tazir. Cross-legged on the bare wood, she met his blue eyes levelly. "His name's Illyrian. He's the Baron's personal advisor, and one of the men up for the Prime Minister's position." Tazir watched Illyrian pry at a knothole in the wall, apparently oblivious to his audience. "Did he tell you that, or did you find out from other sources?" Shylar shook her graying curls and regarded Tazir from a creased face which had once been beautiful. "Both. He's worked with the underground before, mostly semi-legal things to aid his rather rapid rise to power." Tazir nodded, glad to have Shylar and her informers to do his background work. In his younger days, he preferred to leave court intrigue to his gang fellows. He could never bring himself to understand the mentality which allowed the Baron and his administration to turn against his father after more than a decade of meritorious service. Shylar continued, "Illyrian's taken a few bribes. Used to deal black market when he first came to Cullensburg, from Vestburg. He's a noble's child, a younger son. He served as our army liaison 10 years ago?" Tazir repeated, considering. "Army liaison?" Suddenly, Shylar's description seemed to fall together. "It was 8 years, about the time of my father." Grief rushed down upon Tazir, suffocating him. A lump formed in his throat, making him unable to finish. His mind conjured images of his father, proud with his badges as captain of the Baron's army, then swinging lifeless from the gallows. With effort, Tazir forced aside the memories. Dismayed that his father's execution still affected him so deeply, he finished quickly and euphemistically, "Passed away. My father spoke of Illyrian once, thought he might be supplying mind-hazing drugs to his warriors. His sales destroyed the soldiers' judgment and caused a number of good men's deaths. Illyrian is a lizard." Shylar shrugged. "The lizard has money. You don't have to like him to steal for him." Tazir sighed, aware he could never escape the intense morality instilled by his father. Despite 1,000 of Warren's lectures and Blade's growled threats, Tazir had limited his thefts to those who could afford them and shared his spoils with beggars and drunkards. Shylar leaned closer to the floor, following Illyrian's movements. "Since the Baron rules by divine right of Agaran, his sect has a strong say in the appointment of our Prime Minister, but the High Priest doesn't like Illyrian." Again, Shylar met Tazir's gaze. "So, our client needs a blackmail tool, an object he could threaten to destroy if the clergy didn't sanction him. He wants you to steal an artifact from the temple." "Agaran's chalice." Tazir dropped to his haunches, considering. The golden goblet could make any thief rich, even if its intricate designs were lost to recasting. His fee would have to include the item's value as well as reflect the difficulty of his theft. Tazir stared at Illyrian. The nobleman ceased pacing, sat on the room's only chair, and picked idly at his crotch. Tizir leapt to his feet. "Forget it, Shylar. You know I don't handle politics. Why didn't you call Badner or Falindrank?" Shylar rose. Irritation tinged her voice. "Because Illyrian requested you." Tizir paused. "Me?" "He asked for the Shadow Climber." Tizir scratched the back of his head, surprised the notoriety of his secret persona had spread so far. Secure in the knowledge only Shylar knew his true identity as Tizir Madakin, the junk merchant, he shrugged. "I'll have to disappoint him. I don't deal in politics." He headed for the doorway. Apparently thinking Tizir was beyond range of her voice, Shylar mumbled, "Just as well. I hate to see you mauled by lions." Shylar's challenge intrigued Tizir. Not for the first time, his love for action and the intimation he might fail became his weakness. Hand on the doorknob, he turned. "Lions?" For an instant, the corners of Shylar's mouth twitched upward with realization. She bit her cheeks. "Guard lions patrol Agaran's courtyard." Her face twisted in a grimace of regret. "Don't take this job." Tizir shook his head. He pictured the chiseled stone walls of the temple and considered its overtended gardens. Agaran's priests had wrung a wealth of gold from Collinsburg's peasantry for its upkeep. Perhaps some good might come of robbing those pompous clergymen who are bigger thieves than me and my fellows. "I'll do it." Shylar seemed about to speak, but she held her tongue. She pulled a leather pouch from the pocket of her shift and tossed it to Tizir. "Then I guess this is yours. He promised twice the amount when you complete the job." Catching the sack, Tizir peered inside at a fortune in gems. Without bothering to count them, he tossed it back to Shylar. "Keep this as your share." Shylar kneaded the gems through the leather. Her dark eyes widened. Apparently dumbfounded, she stammered, Just 10%, you generous idiot. I can't take this." Tizir smiled. "A fraction of that could buy my ale for years. You have connections. Put the money to good use. Use it to restore the underground's hideaways. Buy a guard or two." He waved. "Give the girls a few nights on the town." He caught the doorknob. Again, Shylar spoke softly. "Shadow?" Tizir faced her. Shylar hesitated, as if unsure. Then boldly she continued. "You're too damned moral for this kind of work. If you just want the thrill, why don't you go legal and become a guard like your father?" Shylar's question awakened a storm of emotion within Tizir. He recalled the respect the other guards accorded his father as captain, and how quickly it had turned to scorn after his father's death. Some of the war atrocities his father had described and the treatment of prisoners in Collinsburg's dungeon sickened Tizir. The thought of taking another life sent a shiver of dread through him. He stared at his tiny hands, deeply scarred with calluses from climbing, and recalled that his father stood half again as tall as himself and nearly twice his current weight. Unable to share his inner thoughts even with Shylar, Tizir parroted a remark Rabbit had once made in jest. "The Baron needs soldiers who can see over the heads of their striped steeds." Without awaiting a reply, Tizir exited Shylar's room. 6 nights after Tizir Madakin's conversation with Shylar, a crescent moon grazed the shadows of Collinsburg's evening. The thieves' moon, he called it, and it was no coincidence he chose to prowl on this particular night. The moon's reflected light traced the outline of the temple to Agaran, but it was not bright enough to reveal faces with any clarity. Dressed in black linen from his hood to the soft socks which covered his feet, Tizir knew his form blurred to invisibility in the night's dank haze. At the base of the wall which surrounded the temple, Tizir removed a soft pouch from the tie about his neck and rummaged through its contents. It held a roll of twine, a second sack, and 3/4 weight of chopped pork laced with a sleeping drug, a deterrent for the lions which prowled the temple courtyard. The wall around Agaran's temple stood as tall as 2 men, a wide white blur in the darkness. Tizir replaced his pack on his neck strap. He paused, listening. By habit, his senses sifted the normal sounds of night. The insects, chirrups, and gentle hoo of an owl, the exchanged howls of distant wolves. Beneath the familiar music of the night, Tizir heard the rustle of weeds under large paws in the temple courtyard. Delicate and practiced as a cat, Tizir caught handholds in the irregular stonework of the wall and scrambled to its top. When he ran with a gang of rogues, his companions bragged he could climb a straight pane of glass. While their claim was exaggerated, Tizir knew he could find irregularities where other men could scarcely imagine them. Crouched on top of the wall, Tizir Madakin studied the courtyard which spread beneath him like a map. Stone walkways bordered well-tended gardens with benches for outdoor prayer sessions. Summer flowers of saffron and blue waved in the breeze, too fat to close completely to buds for the night. Tizir flattened against the stone. Short as a woman and less than 100 weight, he found hiding easier than most men. This fact, and his habit of wearing black for night jobs, had concealed his identity as the notorious shadow climber for more than 5 years. Seeing no movement in the courtyard of a garden, Tizir snaked a hand into his pouch, retrieved a fistful of meat, and dropped it to the walk. The pork impacted stone with a barely audible plop. From beyond one of the tower gardens, a tawny shape leaped toward him with a menacing growl. Tizir recoiled, despite the safety of his position on the wall. Twice the size of a large dog, the guard lion moved with the grace and speed of a house cat. Tizir balled another piece of meat and tossed it toward the beast. The lion retreated to a crouch. It sniffed the air like a dog, circled the meat twice, and pounced on the offering. From the far side of the temple yard, 2 more guard lions appeared as the first finished the pork in a single bite. Tizir wadded meat in his fist and wrinkled his nose at its slightly spoiled odor and the grease which slicked his palm. He tossed the meat toward the lions. It bounced from one beast's nose, and the first snatched it with a warning growl at its companions. Tizir swore softly. One lion aware in the compound could foil his plan, and he was running low on pork. While the first lion chewed, Tizir tossed the remainder of his drug-laced meat. The 2 latecomers to the feast devoured their portions, and Tizir smiled in relief. Waiting for the drug to take effect, Tizir pondered the events which had brought him to the Baron's temple. He thought little of Valerian and his designs against the temple, but he cared even less for Agaran's preachings. A god of precious metals. Tizir pursed his lips and stuffed a sliding comma of hair back beneath his hood. An excuse for manicured gardens, pretty women, and ungodly wealth for that fat priest Bukharin, and with the foolishness of the obsessed religious fanatic, the Baron sanctions Agaran's temple. The first of the lions staggered. White foam bubbled from its muzzle. Tizir winced and looked away. Larger amounts of the sleeping drug could kill, and caution had forced him to err toward overdosing. Slowly he glanced back into the temple grounds. 1 lion fell. Another wandered in chaotic circles. The third sat, whimpering. Still Tizir waited. The drug would make its victims unpredictable before it took effect completely. Tizir redirected his thoughts to the evening in the whorehouse when Shylar questioned his profession. She'd always treated him like a son, perhaps because of his youth, or because he'd become an orphan before his 13th birthday. But his obsession with action was the product of a restlessness he could never satisfactorily explain to her, or even to himself. When he had looked upon his father's writhing body 8 years ago, the world seemed to explode around him. Bound by his promise not to cry, he tried to drive sorrow aside in other ways, performing feats which he now realized should have killed him, but with each success came a natural elation. Soon he found himself seeking a means to reactivate the euphoria which allowed him to forget, as addicted to his own excitement as other men were to the drug seller's herbs. His love for the impossible remained. Unfortunately, so did his grief. The lion sprawled motionless on the stone path. With a sigh of regretful relief, Tizir lowered himself to the courtyard. He moved through the gardens with practiced agility and speed. His blue eyes, narrowed and darting, sought movement among and beyond the buds. The heavy, sweet odor of flowers filled the courtyard. At the base of the cut stone temple, Tizir paused to adjust his hood. Behind him, stems rattled. Tizir jerked his head at the sound. A tawny shadow sprang at him. With a smothered gasp of horror, Tizir leaped for the wall. Claws raked his calf as his hands caught irregularities in the stone. Fast as a squirrel, he pulled himself to safety. "Idiot!" Tizir berated himself. He watched the 4th of the lions pace hungrily beneath him. His options shrank. With a lion still loose in the compound, if the situation in the temple grew uncomfortable, he could not retreat in haste without becoming the beast's repast. He doubted the throwing spike in his belt could do much more than anger it. With no other choice, Tizir continued up the wall stones, knowing the dilemma would still confront him when the time came to make his escape. Balconies jutted from the temple walls. 4 towers rose from the rooftop, a single narrow chimney between them. Tizir clung beside the closest balcony and listened. Delicate, patterned curtains swung through the opened doorway, fluttering in the summer breeze. Their swish masked any other sounds from the room beyond. Noiseless as a shadow, Tizir slipped to the balcony between rungs of a silver railing, which would have made a greedier thief quiver with the injustice of leaving such wealth behind. But Tizir enjoyed the challenges of his trade more thoroughly than its rewards. Once beyond the swirling curtains, Tizir saw a nightstand, a wardrobe, and a bed. A woman huddled beneath a thin sheet which clung to her nearly perfect form. Brown hair spread across an embroidered pillow. highlighting her full pink face. Tizir studied her long-lashed lids and her breasts, which rose and fell in the pattern of sleep. Watching to make certain his movements did not awaken the woman, Tizir crossed the room to a teakwood door on the far side. The handle turned without a sound. For the first time, Tizir appreciated the wealth which kept the temple of Agarin under constant careful maintenance. He opened the door a crack and felt a breeze from the open balcony. The curtain snapped in the draught. Tizir bit his lip and glanced at the woman, but she did not stir. The hallway beyond was empty. Tizir stepped through and pulled the door shut behind him. To his left, the corridor continued as far as he could see. Doors of iron-bound oak and teak broke the walls without pattern. To his right, the hallway ended in another balcony. Someone had propped one of its shutters open for the night. Tizir mentally calculated the time it would take him to cross the passage to the balcony and affix himself to its outer wall. Then he turned back to the woman's room. Tizir's forelock of hair had slipped back into his eyes. He tucked it neatly beneath his hood. His plan required that nothing be visible which could link the shadow climber with Tizir the merchant. He flexed his hands, pleased with a strength far out of proportion to his size, from years of supporting his body weight on his fingertips. He relied on fear and notoriety to make him look larger to those few he confronted in his present persona. Again, Tizir opened the door, stirring air from the balcony. This time, the woman moved. Quick as a heartbeat, Tizir closed the panel and latched it against the breeze. He crossed the room in a bound, pressed his left hand across the woman's mouth, and clamped his right to her neck. "Don't scream." He tightened his grip on her throat. The woman's eyes shot open, green and wild with fear. Her hands went instinctively to his wrists. Tizir kept his body beyond range of her feet. "Who guards the chalice?" She shook her head slightly beneath his fingers. Tizir lifted the hand on her mouth. His right hand tensed. "Who guards the chalice? How many men?" Her cheeks went white. "Just a snake," she stammered. "By Garin, woman, the truth or I'll throttle you dead." Tizir spoke from his chest and held his face in shadow. A snake would go dormant in winter. Unconsciously, his fingers worked deeper into her neck. The woman whimpered, "Please, I swear by my lord, it is a cobra. In winter, Bakaran lights a fire in a hearth, which warms the room, but please don't kill me." "The chimney." Tizir eased his hold on the woman, hoping he had not frightened her too severely. Though her revelation gave him the information he needed, he continued questioning to mislead her. "Which room?" The woman's voice squeaked. "2 doors down the left passage on the right." "Swear it." The woman trembled. "I swear by Agarin." Tizir released the woman. She rubbed gratefully at her neck. He caught her by the wrist. A sudden jerk dropped her face down to the floor. Breath rushed from her in a gasp. "Don't look up," Tizir warned. Guilt tightened his chest as he watched the woman quiver like an insect on the floor. "I'm standing behind you. If you move or make a sound, I'll kill you." Tizir crossed the room with practiced stealth, confident the woman could not know he would never harm her or anyone else. The memory of his mother's slaying still lay like lead within him. In his 3 years with the street gang and his 5 with the underground, he had learned to judge people and avoid those with whom confrontation would result in violence. The linen on Tizir's feet made no sound on the wooden floor. Silently, he opened the door to the empty hall and judged the distance to the balcony. He sprinted through the right passage, leaving the door to catch the cross draft. 2, 3, 4, 5. The door banged shut as he reached for the balcony. As Tizir caught his fingers in wall chinks above its shutters, the woman's anticipated scream reverberated through the hallway. Tizir Madakin pulled his body to the rooftop, counting softly. Shilar had told him the chalice room contained no windows. Soon, the woman's shouts would mobilize the guards to the chalice room door, but Tizir's talk with Bakaran's concubine had gained the final piece of information which might make his plan successful. Tizir scuttled across the roof tiles. Shortly, he came upon the chimney between the towers. As he stared into its depths, his hopes fell. Little wider than a pipe, the chimney seemed too small even for Tizir's tiny frame. If so, instead of leading the guards astray, his last maneuver had served only to sabotage any chance of stealing the golden chalice of Agarin. Had he subscribed to a religion, the shadow climber might have prayed, but to Tizir, the sects of Kullensburg existed only to dupe their worshippers, to squeeze coppers from peasants and gold from the foolish rich. Many of his gang fellows had attended the temple of Karana mistress of lies and ruler of the hellish afterlife for those who practice sin. But Tizir saw no point in announcing his dishonorable profession. For this reason, when the Baron's guards assailed Khara's church, only he escaped execution. Tizir heard the sounds of the temple coming to life beneath him. He studied the opening again. Climbing to the edge, he shrugged his left shoulder from its socket with surprisingly little pain. After several deep breaths, he tucked the sack into his shirt and wriggled inside the chimney, comforted to think that the guards would never check for a man in the opening, and at the same time dismayed to realize no one would ever free him if he stuck. The stone wall scraped Tizir's sides through the thick linen of his costume. Ash dislodged from the sides, pattering to the hearth. Though soft, the sound made Tizir cringe as he gradually worked his way to the chalice room. He landed, feet flat, in the soot-speckled hearth. A table busy with intricate designs held a chalice between two candles, nearly melted to their golden holders. Shadows swam in their guttering light. Nearer, a cobra's hooded head reared to strike. Breath broke from Tizir. Back pressed to the hearth, he seized the spike in his belt. The snake's head jerked toward him. He hurled the spike. It embedded in a glaring yellow eye. The snake's lunge fell short, and it writhed and knotted like a dying worm. For a time, Tizir remained, watching the snake for any sign of purposeful movement. Human voices beyond the door mobilized him. Avoiding the cobra's death throes, he pulled the pouch from his shirt and lengthened it with twine until it hung past the floor. Without stopping to admire the golden masterpiece of the chalice, he stuffed it into the bag. Within seconds, he started up the chimney as the verbal exchanges below him turned to shouts. Tizir quelled rising fear and thrilled to the sense of urgency which kept him in this deadly business. Gradually, he squeezed into the shaft. Ash coated his mouth. Even through his clothes, stones scraped skin from his limbs as he pulled himself to the rooftop. The thieves' moon never seemed so welcome. Tizir forced his shoulder back into place. He would pay for the maneuver with pain for the next few days, but it had helped him through an unusually tight space. He hoisted the chalice through the shaft, looped his cord several times around his neck, and started across the tiles. Feet crashed on the roof behind him. Damn! Tizir quickened his pace. He caught a ledge and lowered his feet over the side. He turned his head to judge the distance to the ground. Directly beneath him, the lion watched with obvious interest. A Garen's ass! What else can go wrong? Tizir scrabbled for a better hold. He heard voices on the rooftop, much closer now, and he froze in position. Tizir felt the tiles shake beneath the guard's weight. Slowly, he clamped the fingers of his right hand tighter to the ledge and let his left swing free. That much less for the guards to discover. The lion crouched beneath him. A man spoke, far to Tizir's left. "What are you doing?" Another replied from so close Tizir winced. "Watching that lion. He's staring at me. Wants to make a meal of me," he added in a disgusted whisper. "I hate those damn things." Tizir's fingers cramped. He tried to rest his free hand against the wall, but he could not reach it from the ledge. Death from angered priests or lions, I don't know which would be worse. Sweat and grease slicked his fingers, and his grip slid along the ledge. The guard's footfalls ran closer. Tizir gritted his teeth, channeling full concentration into his failing grasp. He glanced up. Suddenly, a pale, bearded face blocked his view of the stars. The guard's mouth splayed open. "What's this?" He lunged for Tizir. Tizir shrank from the guard's groping hands. His fingers ached. Swearing, the guard reached out awkwardly. "Lytron, here!" Eagerness caused him to misjudge balance. He tumbled, shrieking, from the rooftop. The lion sprang. Its claws shredded leather like paper. The guard screamed. Tizir's grip gave. He hit the ground, rolled, and froze. Occupied with the writhing guard, the lion paid the thief no heed. Still, Tizir crept toward the outer wall, aware that sudden movement could incite the beast to murder. Suddenly, light flooded the compound. Women screamed, men shouted. Rocks sailed toward the lion. Tizir broke to a run, clambered over the wall, and hit the ground at a sprint. Not daring to glance backward, he sped through the streets, past his own deserted stand, tarp-covered for the night. He careened through the market, around 2 rows of cottages, and nearly collided with a scantily clad streetwalker. "Sorry," Tizir muttered. He doubled back and dove into an alley. He found niches in the stone and mud wall and worked his way upward. On the rooftop, Tizir rolled to his back. His lungs ached. His heart hammered in his chest. Fighting for breath, He watched the thieves' moon as it slipped lower in the sky. Nothing remains but the delivery. Tizir folded his hands beneath his head as his breathing became less labored. What am I going to do with 1,500 weight in gold? Briefly, Tizir considered the advantages of wealth, but the thought seemed too foreign. Once dedicated to achieving the impossible, money became too easily attained and ceased to have value. Though small, my cottage suits me. I prefer beer to fine wines, and I enjoy my work too much to grow soft and fat in idleness. Tizir sweats to a sitting position and caressed the chalice through the bag around his neck. It seems to him the money should be returned to the hungry families whose toil paid for its crafting. Shylar will know the best way to distribute it. Tizir rose, relishing the last of his dispersing excitement. He measured the distance to a neighboring building, leaped to its roof, then shimmied down its wall back into the street. Illyrian had promised to hide his fee in a rain barrel in Ottoman's alley between two stocked warehouses near the river. Tizir would exchange sapphires for the chalice, which, thankfully, would conclude his dealings with the Baron's temple and Illyrian. Tizir traversed a circuitous route through town to Impor Street, which paralleled Ottoman's alley. Discovering the far side of one of the chosen warehouses, he climbed to its roof and flattened against the tiles. For nearly a quarter of an hour he lay and watched for movement in the alley beneath him. The rain barrel sat to his left, near the warehouse door. The wind tossed a discarded strip of parchment, and it scraped the alley stones. Gently, Tizir unwound the chalice bag from his neck and lowered himself to the ground. The sky faded to twilight gray. Tizir caught the barrel lid and lifted it from its base. His movement disturbed the surface of the water. Moonlight shivered from the waves. Otherwise, the barrel was empty. Tizir shook his head, perplexed. His heart quickened. A voice from behind startled him. "Be still, Shadow." Tizir leaped for the wall. His hand settled into irregularities in the mud-chinked stone. Behind him, bowstrings sang. Pain seared through Tizir's shoulder. A cry broke from him. He tried to climb, but the arrow pinned him to the wall. Tizir's voice became an anguished croak. "No." As he worked his shoulder free, agony dulled his senses. A final tear freed him. Though blood coursed down his side in a warm stream, he turned. A sword point pressed against his throat. Tizir's gaze followed the blade to its wielder, and he recognized the huge, sallow features of Selek Canuthal, the Baron's captain. He froze. "Be still, Shadow Climber," repeated Selek, though his words were unnecessary. Arrowheads peeked from the warehouse windows. 7 guards stepped from the doorway and paused at their commander's side. One reached for Tizir. The thief shrank from the hand, but it tore the hood from his head. Tizir's small features, his unruly black hair and moist blue eyes, lay as fully revealed in the twilight as a spreading scarlet stain at his shoulder. A murmur ran through the guards. Selek held his blade tight to Tizir's neck, and the sharp sting of its touch made the thief recoil. The captain spoke scarcely above a whisper. "Tizir Madakin, son of the same, you are now in the Baron's custody." Blood loss strained Tizir's remaining consciousness before he could reply.